So I want you to imagine just for a second, boarding a flight, knowing the mechanics only inspected like 10% of the engine bolts.
Yeah, I am definitely not getting on that plane.
Right. You wouldn't fly. You would demand your luggage back and just run out of the terminal.
Yeah.
Yet historically, that is kind of exactly how the pharmaceutical industry has audited the safety data for, the medicine sitting in your bathroom cabinet right now.
It is a wild thought, but it's completely true.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to explore this really fascinating article from Validfor, written by their CEO, Omer Seaman. It details a massive paradigm shift in pharma manufacturing.
A really necessary shift, honestly.
Totally. We're looking at how artificial intelligence is stepping in to close that terrifying 90% blind spot in detecting data integrity violations. And we're going to break it all down for you.
Yeah, it's a profound shift in how we approach manufacturing at scale. Because to understand why this matters so intensely, we have to recognize that in the pharmaceutical world, data integrity is not just some IT headache.
Right. It's not just fixing a router.
Exactly. It is the literal backbone of patient safety. Every pill, every vaccine, every biologic treatment that leaves a facility is backed by this absolute mountain of data, proving it was formulated correctly, tested properly, and, most importantly, is safe for you to consume.
And if that data is compromised,
the product is compromised, full stop.
And the mechanism for checking that data, historically, is the audit trail review, which, if you're a QA specialist out there listening, this is a uniquely grueling task.
Grueling is definitely the word for it.
You sit down, open your system, and you're staring at, 50,000 lines of continuous system logs. User X logged in at 9:00 a.m. User Y changed a parameter at 9:02 a.m.
User X opened a file at 9:04 a.m.
It's an endless ocean of just mundane digital footprints.
And historically, we've relied on human beings to manually parse those massive data sets. We asked them to ensure no test results were altered, no steps skipped, no data falsified.
Which is, it's a huge ask.
It's an immense vulnerability in the production pipeline, relying entirely on human attention span for that.
Okay, let's unpack this, because expecting a human to manually spot a fraudulent pattern in 50,000 lines of routine system logs, it's not even a needle in a haystack.
No, it's worse.
It's like trying to spot a single, perfectly counterfeited $100 bill by rapidly rifling through a stack of 50,000 real bills.
Yeah.
You aren't processing the details anymore.
You're just looking at a blur of green.
Exactly. Human attention spans simply collapse under that level of monotonous scrutiny.
They absolutely do. And because the industry has long recognized that human limitation, they adopted this deeply flawed, but at the time practical workaround. Well, since these audit trails are generated by the terabyte across global facilities, companies generally do not review all of the data.
Right.
They review a statistical sample, typically capping out at about 10% of the audit trail.
Which brings us right back to the airplane engine bolts.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is the glaring mathematical reality of that practice. By only sampling 10% of the data, a manufacturer is leaving 90% of its operational risk completely exposed.
90%. That's a staggering number when we're talking about medicine.
It really is. And furthermore, this manual sampling method is inherently reactive. Think about the timeline of physical drug production.
Okay, right.
By the time a human reviewer actually spots a data violation in that 10% sample, months might have passed.
Wow, months.
Yeah, months. The batch in question might have already been processed, packaged, released, and shipped to pharmacies.
So the medicine is already out in the world, in people's homes.
Or consider the regulatory nightmare scenario. The internal QA team doesn't find the error at all because, well, it fell into the unreviewed 90%.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. Instead, an inspector from the FDA arrives for a routine audit. They pull the full logs, and they're the one to discover the data integrity violation.
Oh, man, that is the ultimate bad day at the office.
To put it mildly, when a regulator finds that kind of systemic oversight, the consequences are immediate. We're talking severe warning letters, halted production lines, and just a catastrophic loss of public trust.
So the current baseline is basically a system where human cognitive limits force us to miss 90% of the data. And the tiny fraction we do catch is often caught way too late.
That's the reality of the manual era, yeah.
So the obvious solution everyone points to is automation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bring in the algorithms. But I want to dig into the actual mechanics of that transition. Because how does bringing in an AI fundamentally change the QA timeline from, reacting to a disaster to actively preventing one.
Well, it alters the timeline by entirely eliminating the sampling trap. I mean, AI does not experience cognitive fatigue.
Right, doesn't need coffee.
It doesn't need a break. Its pattern recognition doesn't degrade after processing the 100,000th line of a system log. Because of that sustained computational endurance, the AI acts as this continuous proactive metal detector across the entire digital infrastructure.
Wow. So it monitors 100% of the transactions in real time.
Every single login, every configuration change, every canceled test run across all connected lab equipment, 24 hours a day.
That is massive.
It takes the coverage from a fraction to absolute. And that 100% coverage enables a massive shift in how a manufacturer handles what's called a KPA. That's a corrective and preventative action.
Right, the KPA. That's the process of investigating a root cause and fixing it so it doesn't repeat, right? So how does an AI metal detector actually change that workflow?
So traditionally, discovering an anomaly 6 months later means conducting a historical autopsy. I mean, the people involved might not even remember what they did that day.
I can barely remember what I had for breakfast on Tuesday, let alone a file I clicked 6 months ago.
Exactly. But with real-time AI, the alert is instantaneous. If an analyst improperly alters a test parameter on a Tuesday morning at 10:00 a.m., the AI flags the anomaly at 10:01 a.m. The QA manager can literally walk down to the lab floor, investigate the root cause, and execute the QA that very same morning long before the batch is finished or released.
You know, if you're listening to this and you take a daily prescription, this real-time KPA process is exactly what ensures the pill you take today has the exact same efficacy and safety profile as the one you took last month.
That's a great way to put it.
But I do have to push back slightly here. I mean, it is really easy for software vendors to just wave their hands and say, oh, the AI monitors everything and finds the errors. But what exactly is it looking for?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Because if a lab instrument spits out a giant red fail on a diagnostic report, a human QA reviewer is going to catch that just fine.
Sure, they will. And that is precisely why modern compliance AI isn't looking for obvious red fail stamps. The violations that lead to FDA warning letters are rarely that blatant.
So they're more hidden.
Very. The AI algorithms, heavily leveraging anomaly detection and machine learning, they're calibrated to look for subtle, highly sophisticated patterns of behavior. Patterns that are designed to look normal on the surface, slipping right past a human reviewer. The Validfor piece actually breaks down 3 real-world scenarios where AI completely outstrips manual review.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the first scenario from the article. Testing into compliance, which generates what the industry calls orphan data, which is a massive red flag for regulatory bodies.
Oh, it is arguably the most scrutinized behavioral violation in pharma.
Wow. So what does it look like?
So testing into compliance occurs when a user, let's say a lab analyst running a high-performance liquid chromatography test, gets a failing or maybe a borderline result on a batch.
Okay.
Instead of reporting the failure, they repeat the test over and over, tweaking the parameters slightly each time until they finally force a passing result.
I see.
They then officially record that final pass while abandoning the previous failed attempts. Those abandoned tests, that's the orphan data.
But how does a human QA reviewer, even a really highly trained one, miss a whole string of failed tests?
Because the human is typically only reviewing the final submitted report packet. They see this beautifully formatted PDF with a pass result and the corresponding data for that specific final run.
Oh, right. The failed tests aren't even in the paperwork.
Exactly. They are buried deep in the raw back-end system logs of the testing equipment, often completely unassociated with the final batch record. To the human reviewer, the paperwork looks flawless.
So the batch passed, check the box, move on.
Right. But the AI is not just looking at the final submitted document, it's analyzing the metadata of the entire equipment network. It sees the invisible trial and error.
So it's checking the back end constantly.
Yeah. It correlates the timestamps and recognizes that user A ran the exact same sequence on the exact same sample 4 different times in a narrow window, manually aborting the first 3 before saving the 4th.
And it flags that.
The algorithm instantly identifies that sequence as high-risk behavior.
Because it sees the messy, hidden journey it took to get to that pristine piece of paper.
Yeah.
That is brilliant. So the AI catches people repeating tests to force a passing grade. But what if the data itself looks fine, but the circumstances surrounding it are suspicious?
That brings us to human behavior or user analytics.
Yeah, and the best analogy I can think of here is how your credit card company establishes a baseline. I mean, if I buy groceries at my local store every Sunday, my credit card company knows that is my baseline.
Sure.
But if I suddenly try to purchase like high-end electronics in another country, they freeze the card immediately because the context of the transaction breaks the established pattern.
And that contextual awareness is exactly what machine learning brings to pharma auditing.
Really?
Yeah, the AI continuously ingests historical data to establish a unique, granular baseline of normal, everyday behavior for every single employee in the system.
So it knows what normal looks like for you specifically.
Exactly. It learns their standard operating hours, the specific lab instruments they are trained on, and the typical volume of data they process.
So what triggers the pharmaceutical equivalent of a frozen credit card?
Well, the Validfor article provides a perfect example of this. It's called a time-action anomaly.
Oh.
Imagine a senior lab analyst whose historical baseline shows a strict Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 schedule, exclusively interacting with routine diagnostic files.
Very standard.
Very standard. But suddenly, the back-end logs register the specific user logging in at 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday.
Oh.
Right, and they're attempting to access critical system configuration files, the kind of files that control how the equipment actually calibrates itself.
I mean, 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday accessing calibration files? Even without context, that sounds incredibly suspicious.
It does. Yet, a human reviewer scanning tens of thousands of rows of data weeks later might just see a simple line that reads, "Successful login followed by file access."
Oh, because they're just seeing a wall of text.
Exactly. Without the immediate context of that user's historical habits, the reviewer just scrolls right past it. But the AI instantly recognizes the massive deviation from the baseline.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate. Couldn't there be a valid reason for that?
Absolutely. Perhaps there was an emergency off-hours maintenance shift, but by flagging it instantly, the QA manager can verify the context on Monday morning, actively preventing potential malicious tampering before a new batch is run.
Right. It provides proactive contextual security, which is a great bridge to the final scenario. Because we've been talking about timestamps, logins, and numerical test results, things that are very neat, tidy, and structured.
The easily readable data, yeah.
But data integrity issues often hide in plain sight within the unstructured data, specifically the comments fields of these software programs.
Oh, yes. The free text boxes where analysts are supposed to leave brief operational notes.
Right. Because humans are messy, and we tend to leave conversational breadcrumbs behind. A lab worker might just type a quick offhand remark into a comment box.
And historically, automating the review of those notes was nearly impossible. A basic computer script can't really understand intent. It can only do a literal, like, Ctrl+F keyword search.
And a simple keyword search is useless when people use slang or abbreviations or indirect phrasing. This is where natural language processing, or NLP, fundamentally changes the game.
It really is a game changer.
NLP allows the AI to rapidly scan millions of unstructured free text fields looking for semantic context, not just exact code matches. Let's break down the mechanics of that. How does NLP actually read a comment box differently than a standard search tool?
Okay, so a standard search tool only flags a predetermined word, like error. But NLP evaluates the proximity of words, the grammatical structure, and even the sentiment of the sentence to understand the underlying meaning.
So it reads between the lines.
Essentially, yes. It is searching for phrases that indicate an unreported deviation or a procedural failure that maybe someone is trying to sweep under the rug.
Give me an example of what that looks like.
So, if an analyst types, "machine froze, calibrating again," the NLP understands that the combination of froze and calibrating again implies an undocumented system failure.
Wow. Even if they didn't explicitly use the word failure or file a formal deviation report.
Exactly. The AI flags the discrepancy. It alerts the QA team that a potential hardware issue was casually mentioned in a free text note, but never officially escalated through the proper regulatory channels.
Man, so we have an intelligence layer catching orphan data from hidden failed tests, flagging bizarre 3 a.m. behavioral deviations based on historical baselines, and literally interpreting the semantics of comment sections for suspicious confessions.
It covers a lot of ground.
These systems are incredibly, almost aggressively thorough. But honestly, hearing the sheer autonomous power of this technology leads me to a pretty uncomfortable question.
All right, let's hear it.
So, what does this all mean? If this AI system is making these incredibly high-stakes regulatory flags that could halt the production of a multi-million-dollar biologic drug, how do we know we aren't just blindly trusting a black box algorithm?
That is a very valid concern.
But even further, if we have an AI that is this smart, aren't QA managers inherently going to get lazy? How do we prevent a culture where humans just rubber stamp whatever the machine suggests without actually investigating?
Yeah, that is the most critical hesitation in the industry right now, and it is a major focal point for regulatory bodies like the FDA. You cannot blindly trust a black
I
box.
would imagine the FDA frowns upon that.
Oh, heavily. Under strict regulations like 21 CFR Part 11, which governs electronic records, regulators flatly will not allow you to. That is where the necessity of explainable AI or XAI comes into play.
Explainable AI, how does that counter the black box problem?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, an AI that just gives you a red light or a generic error-found message without a reason is entirely useless in a highly regulated environment.
Right.
If an FDA auditor asks you why you quarantined a specific batch, you cannot just shrug and say, well, the algorithm told me to.
Yeah, that's not going to fly.
Not at all. Explainable AI solves this by explicitly showing its math. It provides the exact contextual narrative for every single alert it generates.
So it translates the complex algorithm into a human-readable format.
Precisely. Instead of just flagging a transaction, the XAI dashboard generates a detailed breakdown. It will tell the QA manager. Alert generated because user X performed an action that deviates 300% from their standard operational pattern over the last 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And it continues. They accessed file Y at 3:00 a.m., and the NLP detected the phrase forced run in the associated comment field. Click here to view the original system logs.
So it gives you the timestamps, the historical context, the exact files involved, and the specific text it flagged. It essentially builds an evidence dossier for you.
And that evidence dossier is what prevents the human complacency you mentioned earlier. It mandates a human-in-the-loop architecture.
Human in the loop. I like that.
Because the AI does not make the final compliance decision. It does not have the authority to automatically reject a batch or lock an employee out of the system. What it does is dramatically empower the QA manager.
It takes the blindfold off.
It takes the blindfold off and it hands them a magnifying glass. Instead of spending their days randomly sampling 10% of a spreadsheet and hoping they stumble across a problem, the QA manager is presented with highly contextualized, data-rich alerts.
Yeah, that's a huge shift in their day-to-day.
Huge. The human remains firmly in the loop, using their professional expertise, their knowledge of the lab environment, and the AI's evidence dossier to make an informed, defensible final decision.
The AI does the heavy lifting of finding the counterfeit bill in the stack, but the human verifies it and decides what to do with it.
Exactly. It elevates the QA specialist from basically a data entry checker to a true compliance investigator.
All right, let's bring all of this together. The core takeaway for you listening today is this. In our hyper-connected digital age, the volume of data generated by pharmaceutical manufacturing has vastly outpaced human cognitive limits.
It's just too much data.
Relying on manual sampled reviews for massive audit trails is a risk that companies and patients simply can no longer afford. It's too slow, it misses too much, and the stakes of a compromised drug are just far too high.
Absolutely.
By adopting these explainable AI tools, manufacturers deploy a 247 proactive watchdog. It's not about replacing QA teams. It is about giving them the ultimate analytical instrument to ensure the absolute mathematical reliability of the data that stands behind the medicines we rely on every single day.
This raises an important question, though, as we look toward the future of this technology.
Oh, what's that?
Well, everything we've discussed today highlights how brilliant AI is at learning a user's baseline and spotting subtle deviations. But technology, especially adversarial technology, never stands still.
That's true.
As these AI watchdogs become the hardened industry standard for sniffing out data anomalies, it's highly likely that bad actors will evolve their methods as well.
Evolve how?
Well, will we eventually see individuals or maybe corporate espionage agents using generative AI themselves to actively mask their tampering?
Oh, man. That is a chilling thought. Using AI to defeat the AI.
Imagine a malicious script perfectly designed to mimic an employee's exact baseline behavior. A masking AI that doesn't just alter data, but artificially spaces out the keystrokes, simulates the typical breaks a user takes, and sequences the file clicks to perfectly trick the watchdog system into calculating that everything is totally normal.
Wow.
We could be looking at the dawn of an invisible, high-stakes algorithmic arms race playing out silently in the servers of the labs that make our life-saving drugs. Watchdog AI analyzing behavioral biometrics versus masking AI generating synthetic operational noise to spoof it.
An endless cat-and-mouse game fought entirely in the metadata, far below what any human could ever even see.
Absolutely.
That is incredibly fascinating and definitely a frontier we are going to need to keep a close eye on in the coming years.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope it gave you a radically new perspective on the hidden digital mechanics keeping the pharmaceutical supply chain safe. So the next time you think about those 50,000 lines of mundane system logs, remember, we don't have to rifle through the blur of green paper anymore. We can just turn on the scanner, keep questioning the data around you, and we will see you next time.